Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek Instagram live broadcast. I am, as always, Jason Haas. I am very excited to speak with my guest this week. The guest is Matt Walls, who is a writer based in the UK and in France, who writes for a bunch of different outlets. He's an editor for Decanter. He also has written, I think, what right now is the kind of comprehensive book on the Rhone Valley. So his Wines of the Rhone book was published just a couple of years ago. So I'm excited to talk to Matt. But as I always do, while people are joining, I wanted to share a few pictures of what's going on here at the vineyard. And we have some pretty big news. That news is that we have started to see veraison. So that is the moment at which grapes stop growing in size and start accumulating sugar. They also more visibly change color from green to red if they're red grapes, or green to kind of a more yellowy green if they are white grapes. This is the Pinot over at the Haas Vineyard where I live. So it's a little ahead of what we see at Tablas. And we actually have even a few sections that are more advanced than that. So again, this is still Pinot over in the Templeton Gap. So an earlier ripening grape than any other Rhone varieties, but we are seeing it a little bit here too. So I'm going to show you some Syrah from here at Tablas. You can see we're just starting to see the first little hints of purple in there. I will give you one more shot of that. Again, it's mostly green still out there, just little bits of purple here and there in Syrah. There are other varieties that have not started veraison yet, like Grenache, still full-size, but still resolutely green, and things like Counoise and this Mourvedre that are still not even quite full-size. So this will all happen on a continuum over the course of the next month or 6 weeks. We'll see things turn from green to red. But it's a big marker point, and it's a reflection of how warm it's been here. Out in the vineyard, we are also kind of getting things ready to go through when harvest starts. I mean, obviously, we're still at least 6 weeks away from starting that. But we're going through and doing a little mowing, trying to clean up some of the star thistle and some of the other plants that are a nuisance, the high grass and stuff, a nuisance when we pick. You can see this row on the right was mowed today. The one on the left we haven't gotten to yet. So you can see we're just trying to make things a little tidier. And then in the cellar, we spent a lot of last week bottling the Patalenda Tablas Red. So this is being bottled, and basically we sent straight out into wholesale distribution. So you should start to see this 2023 Patalenda Red momentarily. It's so good. The 2023 wines are really, really exciting. And then we also have some new stuff in our tasting room that we've announced to our mailing list folks, and that will start to make it out into circulation as well. Things like the 23 whites like Grenache Blanc and Côte Tablas Blanc. Okay, let me see. Anything else? I think that basically covers it. That's what's going on here. Let me stop sharing. So I am inside again because it has been warm. We're at the end of a little mini heat wave. Nothing like what we got last time. But it's been up around 100 the last couple of days. It's supposed to cool off starting tomorrow, and we're supposed to have a lovely weekend. So that's where we are. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for bearing with that quick introduction and the tour. And I'm going to invite Matt to join. And hopefully this will work as smoothly as it did when we did our test earlier this week. From Matt. So we will, hopefully this will all click. Technology is amazing when it works. Marvelous.
Hey.
How are you, Matt?
Yeah, good, thanks, Jason. How are you?
Doing great. We sort of switched roles. Now you're outside, it looks like, and I'm inside.
Yeah, well, it was meant to be a beautiful sunny day today in England, but as has been basically the style of this summer in the UK, it now looks like it's going to rain. So if it does, I might have to jump inside, but there we go. At least it's not 100 degrees, which sounds pretty toasty.
Yeah, it's toasty. It's not unusual for Paso, and it's important to remember that those 100-degree days come with still nights in the 50s because the humidity is so low that the heat just radiates off it once the sun goes down and it's chilly at night. But yeah, if you're doing something at noon outside, it's toasty at this time of year. Okay. I gave people a very quick introduction to a few of the cool things that you do, but one of the ways that I love to start when I'm talking to writers is basically ask, like, which came first, the interest in writing or the interest in wine?
Oh, definitely the interest in wine, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I haven't always written about wine. It hasn't been like what I've done, since I started working in wine. I've been working in wine for about 25 years, and I've been writing about wine for maybe just over half that. So I started working in independent wine merchants, for importers, and then kind of slightly later on, I started writing, basically. Yeah.
So how did your interest in wine come about? Was it like on your family table growing up, or did you come to it later?
Uh, It was on the Sunday lunch table. There'd be a bottle of red wine, and when I started secondary school, I could have a little glass. But I think I originally got into wine the same way kind of everybody does a little bit, I think, which is through food, right? Because I've never met a wine lover who isn't into food. Have you? I don't know. I
No.
think it kind of comes with the country. So, and I was into food since I was a little kid. I'd be baking with my mum. Some of my most treasured memories with my mum was, baking biscuits, baking cakes, and then going around selling them to the neighbors. And so from there, it kind of made sense that when I was at school, when I was at university, I would work in kitchens. So, started washing the dishes and then kind of graduated up to kind of basic cooking jobs. And then from there, into the bar and to waiting on tables. And so I kind of learned about wine a little bit that way. I think it was really when I moved to France. So I lived in France briefly in the late 90s. And it was then when I started visiting vineyards in France and actually meeting real winemakers that I realized that it was much more interesting. And actually, wine was very different to the image that we had in the UK in the 90s, which is wine's like this posh drink for upper class people. And I still think there's a bit of baggage around wine, a bit of kind of class baggage around wine in the UK. It's beginning to dissipate now, which is a relief. But, when you go over to France, I wasn't living in the Languedoc, I was living in Montpellier. And when you go and visit winemakers over there, you'll be greeted by a guy who comes in from the vineyard. He's wearing a dirty T-shirt, and he's got mud under his fingernails, and normally a big smile on his face. So, and I realized, these winemakers, they tend to be quite a happy bunch. They tend to be like working but enjoying their work. And I thought, well, there's something interesting here. So that's when I started kind of thinking maybe wine could be for me.
Did you have a wine that for you kind of opened you up to the possibilities of it being something like more than just a beverage?
I think there's been a few over the years. I remember when we first started importing Australian wines into the UK. So I was like a young teenager at the time. And when I first started tasting them at the dinner table with my parents, I was like, wow, what's this? This is like juicy and fruity and expressive and with loads of impact and flavor. And that kind of grabbed me a little bit because before then it was quite a bit of dusty Bordeaux and kind of fairly basic stuff. So I remember that kind of grabbing my interest. But it was later when I was working in wine when I started tasting the wines of the Rhone, particularly some white Hermitage. It was from Chapoutier, actually, his single vineyard white Hermitage. I remember tasting that all of the wines in his selection parcellaire, and it was a 2004 vintage, and I was just absolutely blown away. And that's actually what I've got in my glass at the moment for all those out there. Cheers to you, a little bit of white Hermitage here.
That's very that's in keeping with Thomas Jefferson. That was his favorite wine in the world. He thought that white Hermitage was the greatest wine in the world without exception. I think he published once.
Yeah, and I think I would quite possibly have to agree with him. He clearly knew his stuff.
So your writing includes articles for Decanter, where you're a contributing editor, for Tim Atkin, other publications, as well as books. You work on wine lists, and more than that, how do you choose the outlets that you work with?
When it comes to writing, well, I'm quite closely affiliated with Decanter now. As you were saying, I'm contributing editor with them. So I do 2 Rhone articles for them every month online, and I also do some for the magazine. So most of the time that I have for writing is dedicated to them. Although I do write a few other bits and pieces. I've just finished an article there's a UK magazine called Club Onologique, So I've just written a piece on mature Barossa Shiraz for them. But really, it's about anyone that will give me freedom to write about whatever I want, and just let me do my thing without kind of tinkering too much. That those are the kind of people that I tend to want to work with, because I think that you tend to get the best out of people, particularly writers, when you just say to them, write about whatever you want, do your thing, and just let them go. And that's what Decanter do for me. So I'm quite happy to work with them.
Cool. Do you have particular kinds of stories you particularly enjoy telling?
Yes, I think that we talk about storytelling quite a lot currently, and I think storytelling is important, but that's not all I do when it comes to writing. So I think some of the writing that I do is stories about people and places. So and when I do, it tends to be, I quite like stories about the underdog, right? I think in the UK we have this thing about the underdog. You always want the underdog to win, and so I've recently written a piece, just today actually, I wrote a piece about, there's an estate called Domaine de Pied Blanc, who are based in Gigondas. And so the guy there, he's an outsider, and he said his two great benefits when it came to the success of his estate is that, firstly, he wasn't a winemaker, and secondly, he wasn't from the Southern Rhone. And he really saw those as kind of freeing elements. So, and he's been very successful in just 10 years. So it's the 10th anniversary of his estate. The wines are great, by the way. They're well worth a look. I think you can get them in the US. I'm not sure exactly where, but they're worth
I
a
haven't
look.
seen them, but I'll make a point of searching them out.
Yeah, they're nice wines. So Baume de Venise, Gigondas, and Ventoux. And so just hearing about how he's been treated by local vignerons, and how it's been quite difficult for him. Like, he's from Cornas, okay, so it's not a million miles away. But when we're talking about the Southern Rhone, kind of small viticultural communities, it might as well be the moon, right? I mean, Cornas is like 100 kilometers away. So I've quite enjoyed his story about how he managed to be successful, even kind of despite, or perhaps because of, this kind of outsider status. But also, when yeah.
No, go ahead, continue.
I was also going to say, it's not just stories that I write about. I suppose also what I try and do is, it depends on the audience a little bit. So if I'm writing for people who, for like, sometimes when I'm writing, I think about my friends, right? I'm thinking about what would Sam be interested to hear about? What about Nick? What about Will? What would they like to hear about? And I write for them, because I kind of think that, if I can write for friends, I can add a bit of humor and I can make it entertaining. And I think just writing entertaining wine content, something that will make you smile, this is kind of what I try to go for in a lot of articles, because a lot of wine writing can be a little bit dry, I think, and not enough of it is entertaining, I think.
Yeah, I agree 100%. What was it about the Rhone that kind of drew you in as a place to focus on?
Well, it was partly tasting the wines. So the wines themselves, I just love the profile of the wines, the generosity, the richness, the impact, the flavor. So, it started with the wines. And so I love the wines, so I wanted to go and visit the region. And I mean, you must have been to the Rhone, many, many times. And it has so much going for it. It's beautiful for a start. It's picturesque. It's a gorgeous place. The food is great. The local produce is great. But really, I think for me, it's more like it's the people that make it for me. I visited regions from all over the world. And when you go to the Rhone, it's not like you're going to certain kind of more kind of highfalutin areas like Bordeaux or whatever, where you might meet the manager of the estate who may have been only there for a couple of years, or the winemaker who comes and goes. When you go to the Rhone, often you'll meet the people who have lived there for literally hundreds of years. And the sense of being plugged into this kind of long history that's built up there is something that's kind of special to me. And it gives more value to the drinking experience of the wines. So that's really why I love the Rhone, sorry. It's the people more than anything else.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, I love that it is so many families that have histories there for so long, to the point that, like, the parents at Beaucastel that are on generation 5 at this point and have been farming the same piece of land since 1909, like, they're kind of newcomers, like, even though they've been there for over a century. It's really cool. I love the historical piece of the area. Um,
Yeah, and doing some great work at the moment.
um, so you've written two books, is that right?
Mhm.
I'm not missing any. The first one was sort of a guide, like a how to enjoy wine book. I think you called it Drink Me. Is that the?
That's right. Yeah. So that came out in 20, I think it was 2011 or
Okay.
thereabouts. It's been around a while. Yeah, it feels like another life, that I wrote that. So that was the first one. So that I just wrote as a bit of fun, actually. So I was working for an importer at the time, and I was aware that I was into wine. None of my friends were into wine. Like they hadn't kind of, lived in France or whatever. And at the time, like I was saying, wine had this bit of a kind of fuddy-duddy kind of a vibe about it. But I knew that, wine could be amazing and it can make you as a lens through which you can see the world, right? So I wanted to write, originally it was just going to be like a little pamphlet that I could give people who were a little bit interested, just to try and help them enjoy wine and get the same out of it that I did, right? So I thought I'd just write a little thing in my spare time. And it kind of got bigger and bigger. And eventually, like it was kind of book length. And I thought, well, maybe I could try and find a publisher for this. And I was in the right place at the right time. And I contacted a publisher called Quadrille, who they do a lot of like cookery books, like chefs, kind of celebrity chef stuff over here. And they were doing a series called New Voices in Food, and they were looking for a wine book. And I said, well, here it is. I've got the wine book. It's finished. I was about to self-publish it. And they said, okay, well, we'll have a look. And they liked it, and they ran with it. So, yeah. And that's the point at which I thought, okay, well, I can step away from selling wine and step into writing about wine.
Very cool. And then then you have, of course, the more recently published 2021 published The Wines of the Rhone, which is, I think, really the authoritative book on the Rhone Valley right now. Well, I imagine that was a fairly different process going through the research and the writing of that than it was compared to the first book that you did.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the first book was like an extended think piece, really. And the second one took a lot of research. So when I was asked to write it, so they commissioned me to write it because it's part of the Classic Wine Library, and they have a whole load of different countries and regions that that different authors write about. And they had a gap for the Rhone, so they asked me to write it. So I said yes. And but yeah, it takes a lot more research, right? So and I was kind of umming and ahhing about whether I should do it or not, because I was writing quite a bit about the Rhone for Decanter at the time, which I guess is why they asked me. And so I said to my wife, I've been, they said, could I write this book for them? And I thought, yeah, I can do it. But I'd have to travel a lot up and down, from England down to the south of France. And it would take me out of family life quite a bit, which is what I was concerned about. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, why don't we just all move to the Rhone? Why don't we all go? We'll take the kids, we'll put them in school. She can work remotely. I can write the book. And that's what we did.
Wow. So you were, wait, when was this? Was this during COVID or was this before?
It was before and during. So it was 2018 to 2020. So to begin with, we thought we'd do 12 months. We thought that would be manageable, that'd be fine. And so we enjoyed our time there. We got to the end of 12 months. Hadn't really started writing the book at that stage. So we thought, okay, well, best stay a little bit longer. So we stayed for another year. And then it was in 2020, so it was during lockdown, that we had to, because we thought to ourselves, do we stay for another year? Do we stay for good? What are we going to do? We need to make a decision here about what we're going to do. Is it forever, or do we go back? And like for various family reasons, we thought we had to go back to the UK. So we packed up our stuff again, got in the car, and drove back during lockdown to England.
Whew. And so do you still spend time in the Southern Rhone? I mean, do you still have a place there, or is it more like you go to do research for an article or a visit and then come back?
Yeah, so we were only renting when we were down there. So, but I go down there a lot still. So I go about 5 or 6 times a year. So I'm down there quite regularly. So even though I've moved back to England, I still feel like I'm there quite a lot. And so yeah, and it's nice to be close enough actually to be able to jump on a train after breakfast and to be in Avignon just before dinner. It's a nice stretch.
I'm jealous. I'm jealous of the proximity that you have to that to that region. I'm going in November for the first time in a few years, and like it is so difficult to get from like the middle of nowhere in the middle of California to the south of France. I mean, it is a full day proposition.
It is, but you're in a pretty nice part of the world as well, so it's not all bad.
100%. Um, so, I mean, you're doing all these different kinds of writing sort of simultaneously. I mean, feature articles, you're doing reviews, you publish reviews for Decanter, you're working on the book. What are your thoughts on sort of wine tasting notes and scores? I know that there are some writers who loathe them, some who consider them like the whole point, and everywhere in between. What's your take?
Yeah, tasting notes. I always find them quite boring to read. They're a bit of a kind of necessary evil, I think. And you kind of need both, right? Because a tasting note by itself doesn't necessarily say how good you think a wine is. It might describe the wine, but it doesn't say how good you think the wine is. For me, what the scores really do is that they say the order in which you liked the wines of that tasting. So the wines at the top, get the top scores, and the wines not so good get the less good scores. But I think you need a tasting note as well to describe the style of the wine, because there are some particular wine lovers, critics who might think that very big, powerful, oaky wines are what they love, and they score them very highly, and that's fine. That's a style that some people enjoy. But and they might score that really highly, right? But it may not be the style of wine that you're looking for. So I think you need the tasting note and the score. So yeah, I think they're useful for me to look back and to see exactly where I thought they sat compared to other wines during a tasting. But at the end of the day, yeah, as I said, they're not the kind of thing you want to sit and read, right? They're because they can get quite repetitive and they can get a little bit boring to read. I think when it comes to reading them, they're rubbish, but they're a necessary evil. And they're a necessary part of wine writing.
Yeah, that aligns pretty closely with sort of where I feel they are. I find like when we're going through, I just did, for example, a retrospective tasting of every vintage of the Esprit de Tablas and Esprit de Beaucastel wines, all the way back to our 2000. And like writing the experience of this up on our blog, like I was so tired of trying to find new ways to say like currants and like dark and like the descriptive pieces of it do get so repetitive, but at the same time, like how are you trying to communicate the personality of a wine, and the relative differences in personality? Because that's really what people, I think, who are reading an article like that are probably interested in. They want to know like, how is this actually different from that? What is the reflection of the year? What is the reflection of the choices that we made in the winemaking process? And it's hard to do in a way that I think is fun to read.
It's really hard to do. And actually, when you're tasting a lot of wines like that, which the differences are subtle but important, it's quite difficult sometimes to get through just with the language that we have, which can be quite blunt,
right?
To get through the gradations of difference. And I think that is actually where a score can be quite useful. Just to say, okay, stylistically quite similar, but this is kind of slightly better than that one for whatever reason. So scores can be useful, I think, in that circumstance.
Cool. So, I mean, obviously the Rhone is a real focus, but you just were talking about an article that you were writing on Barossa Shiraz, which is like Rhone grapes, but obviously in a different place.
Yeah.
How much time, like, how much do you see, and how much time have you gotten to spend with the Rhone wines from the United States?
Let me get rid of that. Yeah, a little bit. So basically what I do is I go to the Rhone 5 or 6 times a year. So I really try and concentrate on the Rhone as much as I can. But at the same time, I'm interested in wines from all over the world, right? So I also try and do one of the short haul visit a year. So this year, earlier on in the year, I visited Roussillon, which was fascinating, actually, down near the Pyrenees. And I also try and do a long haul visit once a year as well. So this year it was to Australia, South Australia. So I had a little look around Barossa, Clare Valley, Adelaide Hills, and McLaren Vale. and just to see what they were doing with Rhone variety, or Rhone varieties, like classically Rhone variety, that's Syrah, Grenache, Roussanne, Marsanne, Viognier,
Yeah.
and, um, and which was fascinating actually. The wines of Adelaide Hills, the Syrahs from Adelaide Hills, are out of this world. So they're doing some amazing stuff down there, which I wasn't aware of before. But when it comes to the wines of the United States, I haven't been to Napa for nearly 10 years, actually. So it's about time I got back there. But, being in the UK, that's one of the great things about being in the UK, even though the weather is horrible, is that we see wines from all over the world. So, when we go into a wine shop, we'll have wines from Australia, New Zealand, Madeira, Spain, just all together. And, we have that breadth of wine to taste, which is brilliant. So I do still taste some wines from the US. But yeah, I'm keen to get over there at sometimes soon and have a bit more of a deep dive.
Yeah, I remember, I think one of the first of your articles that I remember reading was a piece that you did for Decanter, basically diving into some of the Rhone Rangers and that were in the UK, and you tasted them alongside, I think you tasted them alongside some ringers from the
Yeah,
Rhone.
I
Uh,
did.
and I thought the article was really fun to read. It was very, very interesting to
Good.
see how you described the different wines. And
Well, it was a really fun tasting to do, and I think throwing in a few like Rhone ringers like that it really keeps you as a taster on your toes, because I think we can all have preconceived ideas about the styles of a particular area. So to do that, to know that there are some Rhone wines in the tasting, it's not to try and spot them. That's not the point. But I think what it's to do is just to make sure that you're just fully aware and fully open to different levels of potential quality. So you're not kind of thinking to yourself, oh, well, wines of this particular region could only kind of have a maximum kind of score level of this or that. So to throw in some really potentially very high scoring Rhone wines kind of levels the playing field, or at least kind of gives it more, makes the tasting a little bit more fun as well.
yeah, it's sort of a way of calibrating also the things that you like and don't like. It's always a fun. We do that here when we're tasting our own wines. We'll often toss in something from the Rhone just to calibrate.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So, and there were some fantastic wines. I mean, some of the Syrahs that I tasted during that tasting were absolutely phenomenal. But the Grenaches that I've tasted recently from California, stylistically very different, I found, to most of the Grenaches that I've tasted from the rest of the world. So often much lighter in color, much lighter in texture, very low in tannin, but can be really, really delicious.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the style of Grenache that we see here. And we don't know if it's because of how cold the nights are here, or the big diurnal swing, or whether it's a function of soils, or whether it's a function of amount of sunlight. But we really do see this kind of almost ethereal, high-toned, generally quite pale in color, high in acid, but like really vibrant in flavor kind of Grenache. It's quite different. It's interesting.
Yeah, very different to Rhone Grenache, which is so often darker, more extracted, more tannic. But I think part of it is culture as well. It's wine culture, because down in Southern Rhone in particular, they like their wines to be dark, right? It's almost like a kind of, it's not exactly a macho thing, but it's seen as like darker wines. They look good. It's this sign of kind of strength and character. And so I think, it's partly the wines are kind of made with this kind of color in mind a little bit sometimes, which is interesting.
Right. That's the whole like Alicante Boucher, which is called Grenache Teinturier in the south, the south of France. So it's like the colored Grenache, even though it's not Grenache. It's
Yeah, that would do it.
that reminds me of a conversation we had when we had we get visits from the parents several times a year, of course, because they're involved not just in the origins of Tablas Creek, but they're here on an annual basis a couple of times. And we had a visit from Francois Perrin after the 2012 vintage, which I remember specifically because 2012 was a vintage where particularly the Grenache was very pale. Lots of things were relatively pale in 2012. It was not a very deeply colored vintage, unlike, say, 11, which was very dark. But our winemaker and I were walking through the cellar with him, and Neil, our winemaker, asked Francois, so is there anything you do in vintages like this to get more color out of your Grenache? And he just sort of looked at him. And Neil elbowed me, said, say that in French. And Francois was like, no, I understood, but that's what Syrah is for. Like, and it was for me
like such a clear encapsulation of kind of one of the things that informs the parents' approach to the wines that they make. That like grapes have things that they do naturally, and you have the opportunity to blend. Don't try to make one grape do everything. Like, don't try to have it be something that it isn't. It's you're not going
Yeah,
to is you.
but I think the danger is kind of wanting to get this color. So you grow a lot of Syrah, but then increasingly, is Syrah really as well adapted to the southern Rhone, to Chateauneuf-du-Pape now as perhaps it was 20, 30 years ago? I don't know. You know, with a warming. Yeah, so kind of using Syrah just for color when not that many people, you know, outside of the Rhone really care that much about. I don't know about you. I don't really care about the color of my wine particularly. I care what it smells like, what it tastes like. But kind of so forcing yourself to use Syrah just for color when perhaps what you're getting as a result is kind of elevated alcohol and jammy fruit sometimes is not always positive.
Yep, I agree. I think that's an advantage that we have maybe here in California, where it's actually a little cooler here than it is in Chateauneuf-du-Pape because of how cold the nights are and because of how cold the shoulder seasons are. People think of Paso Robles as hot because of the days where it's 100 degrees, but the nights are cold year round. The shoulder seasons are colder. The average temperatures are a little cooler. And we pick the same grapes a week to 10 days later than they do at Beaucastel with the same sugars and higher acids. So the grapevines will tell you that it's colder here if you ask. But that does help with grapes like Syrah, where I think Paso is a place where Syrah can really be great. And I think in the Southern Rhone, you aren't going to get a lot of people telling you Syrah can be great there. It can be useful. But
yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious if are there like trends in the Rhone that you think are particular that you're seeing either at the earlier stages or things that you're seeing that are particularly interesting? I know you've written about like the kind of an increased focus on whites and the launch of the new Gigondas Blanc appellation, which I think is super exciting. But I'm curious, are there what are you seeing that you feel like maybe flying under the radar that people should be paying attention to in the Rhone?
Yeah, I think the growth of whites is important and very positive as well. You know, there are some terroirs both in the north and the south which are great for white wines. There are some lovely white varieties, particularly Claret, I think, is a fantastic variety. Roussanne. And also, you know, there are some other little local varieties, you know, Picpoul, Picardin, things that you grow as well, actually, which perhaps, you know, they sometimes with these kind of lesser known grape varieties, people see them as, oh, they're not terribly important because they don't grow them very much. But actually they are important. They give a lot of the detail and they give the other grapes the real local character of the Rhone. So to see the growth of white wines is good. To see more people using grapes like Cunoise, like Vacquerez, like Muscardin, Picpoul Noir, I think that's a positive as well, because, you know, these, you know, as well as anyone, you know, these grapes can be fantastic. You know, Cinsault in particular gives some juice, gives some fluidity, gives some florality to the reds, which they're kind of needing more and more now as the temperature warms up. So I think that's a positive. I think the growth of use of whole bunch is very, generally speaking, very positive. I think it can do a lot for structure. It can do a lot for coming back to the warming climate thing. Basically what we're getting is lower acid, high alcohol, and, you know, this is something that a whole bunch can help with. So basically it can mop up a little bit of the alcohol, reduce the alcohol level, it can add a bit of structure, it can add some kind of freshness of aroma. So I think whole bunch can be good when it's mastered. It's some, you know, if it's excessive, it can be distracting, you know, and it can be slightly annoying, but a whole bunch is good. I think people extracting a little less in general. This is also a slightly positive trend, particularly in the Northern Rhone, using submerged caps, so more of a kind of infusion rather than kind of heavy extraction. This can be a positive as well. So you get perhaps less tannic, but you still get structure. But I think it favours a slightly more kind of drinkable, fluid, finer kind of a style, which I find delicious and very drinkable. Other trends, people dialing down with the new oaks still. I think this is good, using larger containers. So seeing a little bit less oak influence on wines as well. I think this can be a good thing too. I mean, it's something that we're seeing all around the world, but it's certainly something we're seeing in the Rhone as well. So that's a positive. What else? I think those are the main ones currently. I think people playing with carbonic maceration as well can be kind of fun. It's pretty niche though. I mean, there aren't that many people doing it, but there are some people like Domaine Langlois who are making fabulous wines in that style. So I think we're probably going to see a little bit more of that going forward from here.
Yeah, it seems like all of those things are sort of different ways of kind of emphasizing freshness, which I think. I mean, I do see it not just in the Rhone. I see it sort of in styles of wine around the world. We definitely see it here in California as well. But it all seems like positive stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, agreed. So it's about freshness, and it's also about expressing terroir more clearly and in a more detailed way, in a more immediately obvious way when the wines are young as well, which is often how we drink them.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. I have one more real question for you, and then I want you to share like what the best way is for people to follow your work and find and read what you do. But the last real question I have is, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about what it was like kind of putting together a documentary on English wine for the BBC. I saw that you did that. I saw a little teaser of it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so that was great fun. So I was contacted pretty much out of the blue by the series that we're doing. This kind of just it was a short documentary. It was part of it was like a magazine show. So they have like 3 different segments over half an hour. So it was like a 10-minute little 10-minute segment. And so they asked me to come along. And this was actually just after I'd moved to France. So I had to, as soon as I got to France, I had to come all the way back again, ironically, to come and do this documentary. But that was brilliant fun, you know, because it was a great vintage and people were feeling very positive about the wines in the UK. And it was good just to get out there into the vineyards, because for me, when I'm driving in a car and I see a vineyard, I'm in France, right? In my mind, I'm in France. So when I'm driving in a car in the UK near where I am now, where I live now in Kent, and I go past a vineyard, it's so incongruous still for me to think, what is that doing there? That shouldn't be there, because this is so new to us. I mean, do you get much UK sparkling over there?
It's just starting to appear. So I would say just in the last 2 or 3 years, we're starting to see it in a significant way in the United States.
Tried any?
I'm sorry, I lost you for a second. Can you ask that again?
I got a little message box coming up saying I've got 10% battery left.
Nope.
So I think we'll be okay. A couple more questions. I was just going to say, have you tried any of the sparkling wines yourself yet? Or
Yeah.
No? Okay.
Absolutely. I think they're terrific, the ones that I've had. I mean, I don't know how representative the ones that have made it here have been, but it's usually the somewhat larger producers who are able to find an importer in a market like the US. But no, I've very much liked the ones that I've had so far.
Yeah, I mean, they can be lovely. I mean, often slightly higher acid than a typical champagne, for example. But yeah, the quality can be great. So it's exciting, you know. It's exciting to see this kind of happening around me, because for my whole life until recently, wine was always something that happened somewhere else, and we drank it here. And so, you know, to be drinking the wine that's just made down the road is a great feeling.
I guess that's one of the positive impacts of global warming. Like,
Yeah, fun that.
Welcome to the UK and to the global community of winemakers.
Yeah. And you know, 10 years ago, I would never have believed that I would have heard you say that, but here we are. It's good.
Cool. Well, I cannot believe that it has been a half an hour. I have like 5 more questions I wanted to ask you, but I do try to keep these reasonable on everybody's time. But can you share the best ways for people who want to read more of your work? Where can they find you? Where can they follow you? What's the best way to do it?
I think the best way is follow me on Instagram. I'm more active now on Instagram than I am, although not that active, probably should be more active, than Twitter, although I'm Matt Walls at Matt Walls Wine on Twitter, Mr. Matt Walls on Instagram. So those are probably the best 2 ways. I mean, I have a website and a blog, but, you know, like so many people, it's kind of fallen by the wayside and I just don't have time to keep up with it. So yeah, I would say Twitter, Instagram, but also, on Decanter. So, if you get Decanter Premium, if you have a subscription to that, then you can read my pieces twice a month. Or if you get the magazine, then I'm in the magazine every 2 or 3 months as well. So that's probably the best way.
And definitely buy this book.
And buy that book. Yes. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, and just a little plug. If people have not, particularly in the States, I think Decanter, like, people are aware of it, but I don't know that it has the prominence and the being top of mind the way that it should. The content that Decanter has put out and the additional investment that it's made in the United States, the hiring of Clive Pursehouse and the focus on the United States, it is a really dynamic publication right now for an American reader, which I think was maybe not the case even 3-4 years ago. So it is one that I find myself.
Good. Yeah, they're doing better and better things. I think the magazine is feeling more and more contemporary now. The events are getting better and better, and the awards as well. So it's working well. They're as far, publishing magazines is a tough area, but they are actually doing very successfully. So yeah, I'm pleased to be working with them. So I'm glad that you're seeing it more in the US now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, Matt, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking a bit of your Wednesday evening to join us. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thanks, Jason. And looking forward to tasting some more of your wines.
Excellent. I'll see if we can make that happen.
Great. Well, best of luck
what?
with the rest of the.
Thank you. Well, with Verasion here, it's gonna accelerate quickly from this point.
Good luck with it.
Tablas folks, thank you for joining. If you are not a regular watcher of this Instagram Live, we do have an archive of all of the conversations. This is, depending on how we count them, somewhere around our 100th conversation. So we have them on an archive on our website, on Vimeo. We also now have them all uploaded to our YouTube page, so you can find them there. And I'll be back in 2 weeks. So thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody who watched. See you all in a couple of weeks.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.